Hey there, senior leader, and welcome to the Talent Sherpa podcast. This is, as you know, where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. I'm your host, Jackson Lynch, and today we're going to poke a stick in the eye of one of those uncomfortable truths that most companies quietly live with. HR gets misunderstood. And I'm not talking about the read the email more carefully kind of misunderstood. I mean the entire department's purpose and reason for being misread. Like when someone assumes that the fire department is just there to polish the truck and keep the garage tidy. It's infuriating. It is frustrating. It's costly. And if you're running a business, it's quietly draining your performance more than you even imagine. Now, I'm not flying solo today. My co-host on this journey is Scott Morris. He's the founder of Propulsion AI, master of cutting through the noise. I had a different word there. And a guy that I call when I need help. He has worked across enough industries to know that if HR is stuck in a forms and compliance box, the business is going to die. It's certainly playing with one arm tied behind their back. So, Scott, I know that you have some thoughts here, and it's going to get a little uncomfortable and might sting a little. So let me just invite everyone to grab a coffee, settle in, and we can get uncomfortably introspective together. So, Scott, maybe the place to start is, why do operational leaders undervalue HR?
We've conditioned them to do it, is the short answer. And every time we start drawing attention or putting attention on, they don't understand us. It takes control away from us. It furthers that problem. The reality is most CEOs, most COOs, most CFOs are operating based on what they've experienced. And so, we've got to pay attention to breaking the cycle. We're conditioning behaviors because of what we're doing or not doing, and that is getting us a perception that then comes back and puts us, in a box. It's a vicious cycle.
I'm with you. And if you have a business that assumes that our value is reactionary problem solving, whether it's an employee standpoint or filling open roles or making sure that the people data is clean when you try to make organizational changes, that's not proactive strategy. And by treating the HR as reactive, we miss the opportunity to optimize. But if we only talk about things in terms of reaction, which, by the way, most of our HR scorecards are rear view mirror activities and vanity metrics occasionally. We just completely miss the opportunity to reset. So we are most valuable when we are shaping strategy, not just talking about activities.
Yeah, that's 100% right. And I think it starts with, what are we focused on from a measurement standpoint? Right? If we're in meetings talking about the number of people that have participated in the performance management process, or even something that, and I think there's a value to engagement surveys, but if that's what you care about, how many people got the engagement survey done, you are not talking about other things that really do matter. You're not talking about revenue per employee. You're not talking about top performer concentration risk. Like if 80% of our revenue is coming from 20% of our people, resignations become a really big problem. Why are we not talking about that? Because that conversation drives a different perception. That conditions people differently, and that gets us a different reaction.
It does. So my question is where is the root cause of that disconnect? Is it us? Is it the operational leader? Scott, what are your thoughts?
It's both, right? It starts with us, and then we condition those operational leaders to behave a certain way. They then return that to us with an expectation. I expect you to be the person that worries about compliance. And so that's what makes the problem so hard, and why I hope what we're talking about today is how do we break that cycle, and not just the fact that cycle exists, but the fact is we behave a certain way, it conditions behavior, that behavior comes back to us and forces us into something.
So how do you end up changing that perspective? I think you talked about one area, which is figure out what you're measuring, because that dictates where you're focusing your time. But how do you handle it when you have operational leaders who just don't get it.
This is a, like, I don't want to be the one that give the like really hard truth, but here's the really hard truth. You have to look at the role before you get into the role. If the human capital role is reporting to the CFO, my advice is walk away. If what you want to do is drive business performance through human capital, you're not going to do it in that context. And you have to see that coming, and you have to stay out of the situation to begin with. If the role is reporting where it should, which is to the CEO, then you have a different set of questions in front of you. But that's the first thing that you have to look at is what is, because we talk about HR being marginalized. In some contexts, it's already there. It's a past tense thing. And so if you are a human capital leader that cares about business performance, and you have to be introspective about it, right? You have to understand, what do you do? Are you there to manage the administration? Then don't complain that HR is marginalized. Are you there to drive business performance? Then step one is look very carefully at the situation and choose your context as a human capital leader very carefully.
1,000%. So, look, let's. If it's okay with you, I want to tell a real life story about what's going on in my life, because I think it's interesting and it's applicable. For those listening, we actually do these agendas weeks in advance. I can tell you what we're doing a month from now. And it just so happened that this week I had a real life scenario that is right on path. So I'm going to lean into discomfort, Scott, if you think that's okay, and just kind of tell what's going on. Okay. For those of you who know me personally, and I've talked to dozens of you over the last couple of months, you know that right now my company is going through a really challenging time. We're in the solar industry. It is not the best time to be in residential solar. Bankruptcies are happening left and right, and we are one of those. And so we are going through a Chapter 11. We've gone through a sale process. And if you've, by the way, never gone through a bankruptcy, we should do a whole pod on that one, because it is awful. And you do a lot of really distasteful stuff. And the CHRO has a totally different role in that environment, really about trying to support the business, make sure that you have the estate in appropriate position to have a carry forward business, and then also advocate for employees, because there's carnage everywhere, and you got to try to minimize the damage to the folks that have given their all for you over the years. But we're in the middle of that process, and we ended up selling the company, and I was not planning to move forward with the business. It was going to be too small. It was not going to, in my view, do the things that I wanted to be doing. And then we had a adjustment that came out of left field. The new CEO came to me earlier this week and said, after seeing me in a couple of meetings and solve problems real time, said, I really want you to be a part of this go forward team. And so I had a very quick mental shift of, I'm going to go do something different. And now all of a sudden that opportunity is in front of me. And I kind of went into problem solution mode. And what became clear to me pretty early is I needed to make sure I wasn't solving my personal cash flow situation and putting myself in a position that was going to be much more problematic long term. So I did what anyone smart would do in that space. And I called my friend Scott, and I said, okay, I'm just walking out of a happy hour. I think I'm about ready to have this conversation. How do we handle it? I'd been leading about 80% of what this new company was going to be. So I had a very, very strong view on the business. I had a very strong view of what the human capital needs were to focus it. And when I talked to Scott, we kind of figured out, okay, what are the things we should do when this conversation took place, which we anticipated would happen, and it happened about 20 minutes after we spoke. So I thought we needed to have a point of view on the business, and I had that. Here is in order to meet the new business objectives, I looked at that strategy through a talent lens, and I had a very, very strong belief of what was likely to happen if we did nothing, what the root causes were, and what we needed to do to address it. And so I wanted to make sure that we had a shared view with the CEO as to what that looked like. And so we had a lot of questions back and forth around kind of, what do you think the right HR structure is? What do you think the value add is? And candidly, I got none of the right answers. Why are we a part of this business? Why are you over investing in HR relative to what your initial thoughts were? None of the right answers. And so I took the lean in to discover position and started saying, well, here's what I think it is. And I shared my view of what the business needed from a talent perspective, where the roadblocks were going to be that needed to be addressed, what the root causes were, and had all of the conversations about, we should be focused on talent density around assets under management per employee to have a better feel for leverage. We ought to be looking at clarity of expectations. And I even had the conversation of, do you believe in PIPs? I think we should just write a check and let everyone go and go forward on their merry way, because it's probably the lowest cost approach to the situation and the highest value for both the business and the individual. So you don't have to go through all that. Like, we had a very, very detailed conversation, and I said, I need you to think about whether I can add the value for this. And then I went home. And I called Scott on the way home, and I said, I don't think there's a match here. Went home to my wife, and she's like, I'll support you in whatever you do. But then, and I said, I don't think I want to do this. But there were personal reasons why it was even a question. Notably continuation of income for a short time period, and a continuation of benefits for some things that were important. So about 24 hours after that, I got the call back from the CEO, and he said, I appreciate the conversation that we had. I don't think I want the HR that you're going to bring. And I said, I think that's really wise. And I'm grateful that we reached this opportunity to have the discussion in advance. And we, I offered to be as helpful as I could to help them set up to be successful, because I do believe that business is going to be successful. But as I kind of pull back, I think there's a lesson here for new CEOs who are looking at their first job, and experienced CEOs who are feeling trapped where they are, or looking to move into a new business. That some might look at that story and say, "Wow, so a kind of a jerkopotamus move. You got offered a job and it got taken away 48 hours later." But it's more detailed than that. We had the meeting of the mind discussion, and it wasn't. So what does that mean? It means you're going to have that conversation later when you're on the other side, and it's going to be frustrating, and you're going to feel like you let people down if you walk away at that point. And I'm kind of an all-in guy. Like, if I'm in, I'm in. And I didn't think I could have been in, and I probably would have turned that down. If given the opportunity, but gratefully I wasn't. And I consider that just a big win. So let me pause. Scott, you had a view of this story from the sidelines. I'd love to get your instincts and your insights as to kind of what you saw and what our listeners and viewers can learn from my experience.
Well, man, first of all, thank you for being authentic, and thank you for sharing the story, because I know how hard that was. You've been doing this, 25 years, more than that? And that kind of conversation is still hard to have. So if you're an emerging CHRO, it's hard. And by the way, a part of our audience is CEOs too. And if you're a new CEO, you need to be having these conversations with your head of HR as well. You need to be seeing on the other side, is this a person who can help me drive business results through human capital? Let me pull out a couple of things that I observed. One, it's really easy for us to be just very simple in our thinking. Do we do tactical HR? Do we do strategic HR? And everybody goes, oh, I want to do strategic HR. But why? And I don't want the audience to miss the most important part of your story, which is you have and had in that context a plan for how to maximize what was happening in the business through human capital. And we can't just say to ourselves, oh, I just want to do strategic HR. You can't even say, hey, I just want to measure the right things like revenue per employee. What's driving it? What's driving revenue per employee? And do you have a plan for how you would change it and make that ratio go up? Because if the answer to that question is no or nothing else matters. It doesn't matter whether the CEO gets it. It doesn't matter whether the CFO gets it. If you don't have a plan, you're dead. And so the first thing you got to understand is, like, do you as a CHRO understand how the business drives its performance, how the business makes money, how the business loses money, what the levers are? If you understand those things, now you got to come forward and say, can I, am I going to do that with a partner? Am I going to be able to enact my plan with a partner who wants to do it? Because I think there are three kinds of CEOs in this situation: the ones who absolutely get it and are going to go with you, the ones who absolutely don't get it and want to put you in a compliance box, and the ones who want to get it and want you to provide some leadership about how we would use human capital to move the business. And they're open to the idea. So if you don't have a plan to fill that in with when you encounter that, I think you're in trouble. End of TED Talk on that one. But that's the principal thing that I took away from the interaction you and I had around with this was not a competition for, do we have strategic HR or not? It's, I have a plan for driving the business. Are you going to let me drive that plan?
Yeah, over the next 12 months, here are the things we need to do differently than what we had done over the last couple of years that I had been there. And the business strategy changed, and we re-looked at the business strategy through a new talent lens and said, how do we maximize the benefit to the business to drive the outcomes that are necessary? And like, I couldn't have had that conversation without having that informed point of view. And I developed it rather quickly, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but it had to have a couple of very, very critical points that lead to. And so in the first year, here are the things that I need to be focused in on. And in the second year, here's what I anticipate, if we're successful, the points that we're going to need to be focusing on. And here's how we'll measure it from an outcome perspective. And here's how that impacts to the business. And if the answers come back, well, what I really want to do is not have to get involved in these HR discussions and provide leverage for my time. Like, that's not a fit. and it's, I had a long time ago, I had a conversation with a couple of colleagues that are well known. Probably shouldn't share their names here, but I've been open that my first CHRO job was probably my first kind of stumble into my professional career. I did fine. I didn't do great, just like every other CHRO. And afterwards I came back and I talked to these colleagues and said, what the heck do I need to do to make sure that the kind of work I think we need to do is the kind of work that I will be allowed to do? Because that was the misfit, and that was the stumble. And the answer came back: the only way you really know whether you're going to do progressive HR work, which is not, it's strategic tactical focus on it, is how I define progressive HR. The only way you know you're going to do that is if you are in fact going to a company that is already doing that work. Mm-hmm. And the minor kind of secondary modification of that is if they have a brand new CEO and they've seen it before, they know the standard, and they're willing to lean in to drive alignment across the C-suite. And if you don't have either of those two things, you're not going to be doing progressive HR. No matter how talented you are not going to be the one to open everybody's eyes. So you don't want to step into that. And that's what I thought I was finding in this opportunity, that, my God, I'm going to be doing stuff that I think is the wrong stuff. Can I actually do that? Which is why I felt comfortable leaning in so strongly to, let me define what I think the world looks like. And you need to make sure before we both jump in together that we're on the same page. And we weren't.
And what I like about it is that you had a really compelling personal reason to stay, and you were still willing to walk away, because staying is not going to be good for the business. It's going to be wasteful of resources, and it's not going to be personally good. Let me try and make a practical example out of this, though, Jackson, because we, like, even well-intentioned CHROs who are wanting to measure the right things sometimes go about things in a practical sense the wrong way. For example, succession planning is an activity that is on the more strategic side of the spectrum. And a good CHRO should be thinking about succession planning. But if you start from the point of view of, well, we need to have succession planning, I think you're starting in the wrong spot. What you need to do,
Right.
and back to my point about the plan for the business, you need to look at the business situation and you need to say, hey, wait a minute, here's something I see. 80% of our revenue is coming from 20% of our people in principle, right? That's a problem. And so if you start there, one, you're starting with a factor that is driving the business. So you are already shifting the perspective of the rest of the C-suite because of what you're focused on. Now you say to the CEO, 80% of our revenue is coming from 20% of our people. I think we need to have an insurance policy against that. Let's start getting people ready for some of these critical roles. And let's start thinking about how we either like what's happening to the other 80% of the people, right? Maybe we don't need those jobs, right? Let's look critically at that, or maybe we need different jobs that we don't have, right? Now you're engaging the CEO in a very different conversation. And it's not about succession planning. You're going to do succession planning, but you're engaging them in the topic about what drives the business, not the tactical aspect, even if it's on the more strategic end of the spectrum of how you're going to fix it. That's what CHROs need to start with.
And how do you measure performance against that? It's very straightforward. It's not completion of succession planning. It is not anything to do with succession planning. It is, does the revenue hit the growth target? Period. Full stop. And we've got to move past the notion that I can only be measured on things I have full control of. A CFO is measured on the financial performance of the organization, through which they have limited direct impact. We have to adopt a similar approach because to the extent we focus in on processes, and in some cases, sub-processes that we believe inherently will drive the business forward because we have good intentions, and oftentimes they do. You still lose the focus on the activities if you are only focused on the HR aspect of it. You've got to tie it back into the scorecard the CEO is deeply committed to driving. And if you don't do that, you're not going to have the impact that even the same work ultimately could have.
Yeah, that's 100% right. And in fact, I think every C-suite leader, one of the requisite factors should be that you have the ability to lead through influence and not direct authority. You see that in really good managers who are at lower levels of the organizational hierarchy, right? That's how you can spot a really good manager, is they're not leading with authority, they're leading with influence. And it should be requisite at the C level that you are doing that. So you've got to control all of the factors. But to the point you just made, if we're talking like if the CEO and the CFO and the COO and the CHRO are all talking about the same factor that's driving the business, they are then going to, and they agree about those, they're then going to turn back to their teams and start to speak the language of their independent discipline. The CFO is going to attack the problem through the financial lens, and we're going to do it through the human capital lens. But the root, the hub that all of those folks are connected to is always the business problem. So if you don't understand it or don't have a plan for it, there's no way that you can get any level of activity that's truly strategic.
Let me build on that. If you have a strategy problem or if you have an execution problem, and you look at all of the root causes, it always funnels down to one root cause. You have a talent challenge. It is the talent that will drive strategy. It is the talent that will drive execution. It is how you align and allocate, as if you are a portfolio manager, that talent across the organization, as if you are a CFO in deploying capital throughout the organization with the highest return on investment. It always comes down to a talent issue. And if you can't make the compelling case to the CEO that is in fact the single most important driver, then you're not going to be in a position to make the impact. And oh, by the way, if you are in a position where you are making that assessment and they don't get it, and they start talking about benefits administration and reduction in noise and like, God bless you, but you can't take that job. And over time, yeah, you got to walk away. No matter how hard it is, you got to walk away. So, Scott, why don't I ask you to wrap things up for us here a little bit? We've gone completely off what our original outline was, but hopefully the audience appreciates a very real time conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things that I would offer as a summary. Is one, think really carefully about your own understanding of the business, and if you don't really understand how business performance is changed, start there, because you can't do anything else without that. Once you have that understanding, work on your own plan. How are we going to change those numbers, and what human capital factors are driving the numbers as they are today? Then start looking for, now you've got a plan. Are you going to be able to operate it? Do you have a partner in the CEO? Lead with questions. Figure out where that person's head is relative to your plan. Speak the language of the business. Focus on those factors. Make your own evaluation. If you find yourself in a situation where you don't have that partnership, think carefully about that situation and look really carefully as you are evaluating roles for what, is the flexibility going to exist? And there are clues that get left along the way for you to come in with a plan for using human capital to drive business performance, and think carefully before you take that job. Get yourself into the right context so that plan can come to fruition. That would be my summary, Jack.
It's right on. And if you do that, you can thrive. And just a little added bonus, if you are interviewing for a CHRO job, one of the questions I will always ask the CEO is, I'd like you to talk to me about the last 10 discussions you had with your CEO. And get all 10. And you'll find out where the current state is through that question. And then you can say, if there are breadcrumbs that can lead you to where you think that business needs to go, then you build upon that and say, well, it seems to me from this conversation that the business needs X, and here's where I've seen a similar situation. Here's how I approached it. I would love your assessment of kind of, is that what you're looking for, or were you more comfortable with the way that you handled it previously? Because you've got to make sure that there's a huge fit where you can both thrive. And I think that's, I've asked that question, and it's a little different from how I did this. So anyway, let me wrap this thing up, and we're going to land this plane. Thank you so much for listening to the Talent Sherpa podcast. This is, as you know, where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. And a quick shout out to one of our favorite listeners. Hi, James.
And we appreciate those of you who are part of the Talent Sherpa community. If you enjoyed today's episode, hit the like button and please subscribe. Leave us a review on one of the platforms, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube.
And if you're a CHRO wondering, my CEO keeps asking me to do AI, where do I start the journey? Don't forget to check out Scott's Propulsion AI at www.getpropulsion.ai. They are transforming how smart companies turn HR insights into powerful outcomes.
And if you are a new CHRO, if you're an emerging CHRO, if you're changing contexts, and you're ready to accelerate your impact, go over to the Substack. See us at talentsherpa.substack.com or mytalentsherpa.com, because we've designed resources specifically to help you navigate, elevate, and deliver results from day one.
So until next time, keep pushing the limits, keep focusing on outcomes, and keep on climbing.